I'm Megan Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. And I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, Waldo Jaquith. You've seen the bio for him in the program, and so that you already know then that he is, sort of the wonder kid of political programming. Not the programming of party platforms and $1,000 a plate dinners or anything, but programming of the zeros and ones kind, HTML, RSS, API, VRML, and so on. Rather than painting pictures of politicians, he says, I write software to paint pictures of politicians. You've seen also that he's a Knight Foundation grant recipient for his State Decoded program, which strives to make state statutes easier and more useful to read online. You've seen that he's been named a champion of change by the White House and an Open Gov champion by the Sunlight Foundation. And you've seen how he's been working for the Obama administration in launching an ethics website and database. Mind you, this is the second time that the White House has called Waldo. First time they called to ask him to work for him, Waldo politely, and if you've met him, you know just how darn polite and cheerful he can be. He said no. He was a new father, and he was reluctant to move him or his family away from their idyllic mountaintop setting there in Charlottesville for the mean streets of D.C. It's not listed on the bio, but before all that, Waldo was turning heads as a 20-something wonder kid in Virginia. So that's why we like to say that he is our wonder kid. People around the state well, I can't say first, because he's been doing things ever since I think he could talk, but when he launched a website called Richmond Sunlight. What it did was it took the dry data of the legislative information system and compiled it into a platform that allows users to share, comment, and tag bills that they're following, keep track of meetings and the committee memberships, and provides detailed information about the legislators, not just what district they represent and what their phone number is, but what their voting patterns tend to be and what some of the typical legislation might be that they would offer. Waldo, in a news article, once called the website catnip for political junkies. Waldo was on the VCOG board of directors for far too short of a time, and regardless of how I feel about Obama and his administration on this issue, I'm extremely upset with him for taking Waldo away from me. And because of that, and since we're here in New Orleans, which has a colorful history of political shortcuts, I'm considering creating a nasty rumor that Waldo was stationed in Benghazi while targeting a Tea Party activist at the Associated Press. I'm sure the White House will drop him faster than Edwin Edwards drops a 40-year-old wife. During his time on the board, and even since, Waldo has always been available and willing to me to answer any tech questions I've had. And there have been many, but he clearly and gently explains to me everything to me, and for a fleeting moment, I think I've understood. He has a well-read blog in Charlottesville, and was blogging before people actually knew to call it blogging. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, do. He's extremely informative and amusing, as you will soon find out. So it is my pleasure then to introduce my friend Waldo Jaquith.
Howdy, thank you. Usually when I speak at events, they have me write my introduction and then somebody introduces me. And I think, oh, that's so nice of them to say that thing that I wrote about myself. that was an exception. I want to talk to you today about a very simple thesis, which is that state law websites are terrible, without a single exception. I assume you've all at one time or other looked up your state's laws online, so you know what I'm talking about. So let's look at a few. This is Alabama's open meetings law. I'm not hiding anything. No parts of the website have been hidden. This is everything that is on the page. There's no navigation. There's no title. Nowhere does it even say that this is a law or that it's an Alabama website. There are no links. Like, it's a total dead end. Louisiana. Again, this is everything. Nothing has been cropped out. This is very crude. This is the stuff of the WWW in 1994, but it would have been lame even then. Georgia punted like a few other states. Georgia, anybody from Georgia want to claim this? Anybody from Georgia? Hi, aren't you? Yeah, okay. So you're familiar with this. Georgia punted. They had LexisNexis put their laws online for them, which at first glance you think, well, this looks a little better. It's not. There are still no links other than, once you ignore LexisNexis's own navigation and footer, there's still no useful features. At least they indent a bit the hierarchy of the text. We really scrape at the bottom of the barrel for compliments here. It's almost a plain text display, and it's scarcely better than the others. This is Virginia's open meetings law. Again, terrible. They do one thing that's a little humane. You can see the links, the blue underlined text, where there's mentions of other laws. At least those are links so that you can get to those. And I'm not showing you the worst sites here, by the way. This is a representative sample. I haven't deliberately picked the worst ones. The worst, by the way, that award goes to West Virginia for the regulatory website, where they have scanned in pages of originally typewritten pages that they have amended by scribbling it out in pen and writing the new text to amend it. Anybody from West Virginia here? No? Oh, wow. I feel it seems cruel to make fun of them when nobody's here. Yeah. So let's look at the bottom of this page here. So see that string of incomprehensible text in the last paragraph? Let's blow that up. So normal humans would never know it. But this is the legislative history of the law. In encoded form, this tells you which bills passed over the course of many years to gradually build up what are today the words that comprise this statute. I don't know why it's in this form. I don't know why it's totally unlabeled. I mean, let's go back here. You can see it doesn't say history. It doesn't say legislative data. It's just suddenly the system has vomited up some random strings of text. But this is potentially really useful stuff, but they're so worried about, maybe it's the heat death of the universe they're concerned about and they want to save electrons, maybe. I don't really know what the kindest explanation is for this display. Kansas, this is an actual quote. I will read out loud so you can properly appreciate how ludicrous it is. From the homepage of the Kansas Administrative Regulations site. To find the latest version of a regulation online, a person should first check the table of contents in the most current Kansas register, then the index to regulations in the most current Kansas register, then the current KAR supplement, then the Kansas Administrative Regulations. If the regulation is found at any of these sequential steps, stop and consider that version the most recent. No, Kansas, you stop and reconsider your website. Because this is ludicrous. We can do better than this. This is really exciting source materials. Even people who don't care about the law, just programming geeks like me, should look at this stuff and salivate. And many people do and say, this is really great source material, waiting to be deeply interconnected. All those levels of stuff in the Kansas system. They have systems and databases for all of these. They just never connected them to each other because they have all of these systems for producing flat HTML websites with no understanding of how these can connect. What we need is humane code display. And there's a few primary aspects to this. And the first is we were all beginners once, but we forget what it was like to be new at something. So who puts together these websites? Very well-intentioned people who work for the Code Commission, who work for the folks who put together the registry, whatever it is for each state, who are, if not attorneys, people who are steeped in this material. And so fundamentally, they're putting up these websites for themselves. I don't mean that in a literal sense, but they are their own audience. And they're not going to their mother or son or cousin and saying, hey, can you figure out how to start a barbershop? Just pretend you're going to start a barbershop. Look through the regulations and figure it. They don't do that, so there's no understanding of how bad this is. The second point is that legal codes, these are just words. We know how to make words beautiful. We've been doing it. I mean, look at illuminated Bibles from 1,000 years ago. These are amazing works of art put together by monks on scrolls. How can we not extend our knowledge of how to make words beautiful and consequently more legible to the web in 2013. We know that by setting the letting appropriately, we know that by establishing the appropriate measure for the page width, we know that all these things make material easier to read and comprehend. And for something as alien and confusing to people as laws and regulations, they need to be easier to understand. It's really essential. The third point is that we need to represent the interconnectedness of rules. That, to make an obvious parallel here, laws aren't some sequential series. It's not like reading a book. You know, it's more like a choose your own adventure book. It's a web that might sound familiar, of how all of these rules and laws connect to each other, as we saw through the steps for the Kansas system. We have a system that we call the web for representing this sort of data. And yet, when we look at even some of the better state code websites, the closest they have to navigation is previous and next. This is not using the web as the web. We have the perfect solution to this already. We're just not using it correctly. And the fourth and most important point is that other people are smarter than you, and you have to plan on that. Now, what I mean by this, well, I'll show how to apply it just to laws. State law websites very rarely provide what we call bulk downloads, a file with a copy of all the laws as a plain text file or XML or whatever, pick your format, but as something that somebody can download that one file. And so if you wanted to set up, as many of you have, a FOIA repository for your own state, here are all the FOIA laws for Virginia. Well, you have to go through the state code website and copy that text and paste it into your HTML editor and put up the little site for it, and then update it every year by going back and seeing what's changed, or you probably know what's changed, and making those changes yourself. If that was provided as a bulk download, you could automate that. So the alternative is, if you want to set up your own site for a huge chunk of the state code, you have to write what's known as a scraper, software that connects to every single page, copies the text off, loads it into a database. It's a really laborious process. So what states could do better is to count on other people being smarter than them and knowing how to put up a better website if they could just have the raw data. The corollary to this is that another smarter person than you is you in the future. If you look at your work a few years ago, as I hope we all do, and think, oh my God, that's embarrassing. I didn't know what I was doing. No, you knew what you were doing. You're just better at it now. So if Kansas produced and consumed their own bulk downloads to produce these websites, it would be really easy to make it better. But instead, they're locked into the system that produces these really drab websites. They didn't count on future themselves being smarter than present themselves. Here's why this is important. So this is an attempt to display a web of data exchange for the sort of open data that many of us here are concerned with, sort of open government data is a better way to put it. So we're all used to this upper right quadrant, where most states, and certainly the federal government, there's lots of sources of campaign finance records, of election results, of legislation and lobbyist filings. And we know how to relate those, that campaign finance records, that you can connect that to the candidate listing and election results, which you can then use to determine who's in the legislature and the legislation they introduce, and what lobbyists are lobbying about that legislation. We get that. But if you wanted to connect that data source to, say, and I've just given a few examples here, court rulings, well, people really are fired up about HB1 that was introduced a few years ago, and they want to know, well, was HB1 struck down? Well, the court doesn't issue a ruling on HB1. They issue a ruling on the law, and they need to know that citation. But most people don't know that, and they're not going to make that connection. So if you wanted to know what member of our legislature has had the greatest number of their bills struck down by the court, well, good luck figuring that out, because you can't do that without an open repository of state laws that a request can be intelligently sent to, saying, hey, can you give me this data on laws, or that can be interfaced with bulk data from court rulings that can provide a listing of here are all the court rulings that cite a given law. Let's do this better. We can do a better job of this, not just individually, but like as a species. I feel we can do better than this. So I'll tell you just a little bit about the state decoded, which Megan has already explained some. I think that is, I don't want to say the missing link, because I want competition. I'm encouraging other people to create similar software that does the same thing. My role here with this project is I've received this funding from the Knight Foundation to create software that can ingest that bulk download, that can ingest a copy of the laws from a state, and in 20 minutes, automatically, no human intervention required, pop up a complete, finished, beautiful website with embedded definitions and the ability to connect to other websites if they support the right standards for court decisions and legislation that's relevant to each law, with bulk downloads, with an application programming interface and an API that people can connect to, that programmers can connect to extract data. Definitions, a great search system. It does it all automatically in about 20 minutes with just some legwork to get it set up in the first place. I am not deploying 50 odd sites. My job is to build this software and to find partners in states who say, yes, we will take this on. We will establish a state code website that is better than the official one. So you can see that now for Virginia at vacode.org, marylandcode.org just launched, sunshinestatutes.com, Barbara Peterson's project. You can see that up. milaws.org, the Michigan site, hasn't officially launched yet, but it's up. You can look at it. And there's a bunch more on the way. And it's being used not just for laws, but also some states are looking to use it for statutes, and some state governments are looking to use it as their official state code website. So I'll just show you a little bit of what the resulting software looks like. You saw what the open meetings law looked like on the state code site 10 minutes ago. This is what it looks like here. So this is based on just feeding it that bulk download of the entire Virginia code. There's no manual labor, there's no editing. So at the top, you can see a breadcrumb trail. You can see it's part of Title 2.2, Chapter 37. You can click on either of those to go see those titles or chapters. You can see the Facebook recommend link at the top of the sidebar there. People get excited about the laws that they're looking at. If it's relevant to them or their lives or current news and they want to share it with people, let's make it easy for them to do. You can see the history section. So that incomprehensible section of text that we saw, this is boiling it down to its simplest form. How often has this been changed? People find it interesting to see, oh, this law was passed in 1918 and hasn't been touched since. That's valuable information. Or this is, as with FOIA laws, it's being changed constantly. That's also valuable information. Amendment attempts. This shows you all the bills that have been filed since 2006, which is as far back as my data goes, that have attempted to amend this law, whether it succeeded or not. And it's fascinating to be able to see that, because then somebody can go and see, well, what did that bill say? And they can watch the video from the floor of the legislature and see the debate about that bill. So if you want to know the legislative attempt, or the legislative intent when passing that bill or creating that law, it's all right there. It's a small thing, but here's another law where you can see that indentation of subsections. It makes it so much easier for people to read. It's such a tiny but humane step. If every subsidiary section of text is indented some, so if you get to a section you don't care about, well, keep scrolling until it outdents a bit and carry on there. It just makes it a lot more legible. Here you can see listing of court decisions as well. Same system, it's scraping those decisions for a different website that I run, scrapes those court decisions off the court website and lists court decisions that cite this section. Simple, but it works. Definitions, this is an aspect of this that I'm really psyched about. Definitions are scraped. So anytime it detects that a word is being defined, it pulls out the defined word and the definition and builds up a dictionary. So in the case of Virginia, it's about 13,000 terms populate this dictionary. Some words, like the word person, is defined 170 odd times in the Code of Virginia, 160 odd of which are unique and some are duplicates. And so it also determines what the scope of that definition is. Because the word person, as applies to the State Corporation Commission, doesn't include humans, but only various types of business entities. But as applies to 18.2, the criminal code, well, it only applies to humans. And I found a few places where it's wrong, and you can actually charge a corporation with murder in Virginia, but I don't think that's really what they're going for, but it's not my fault that it's wrong. So wherever you see a word that's defined in the code, has a dotted underline, you can pass your mouse over it. When you do, you get a pop-up definition like this that explains precisely what a barber is. Definitions are wildly important to understand legal codes. You can imagine a law that says you can't play loud music downtown on weeknights. Well, that tells you actually nothing. What is loud? What is music? Where is downtown? What night of the week is a weeknight, and what time does that begin and end? Now, that could be, weeknight could be defined all the way at the outset of that legal code, all the way in the very first title. But then loud music, or loud, could be defined at the beginning of that title. Music could be defined in the same section. And normally, looking at a law, you have no way of knowing which words have special definitions, least of all where to find them. It's a totally broken system in print and on existing websites. This is a very simple step that makes laws just incomprehensibly easy to understand for somebody who's familiar with them. it's hard for us to relate to what a huge benefit this is to people who are not familiar with laws. Another simple thing is references to other sections are made not just into links, but when you pass your mouse over it, you see what title, chapter, and what the section name is. Because knowing in the case of this that something is promulgated pursuant to 54.1-2729.01, that tells nobody anything. But knowing that it's in fact relating to the practice of dental assistance, well, now we're getting somewhere. Every subsection has a unique permanent link. So when you send somebody that link and they load the page, it's highlighted. It's a small thing, but it makes it really easy to call attention to exactly what you want somebody to be seeing. Another nice touch is the website address. You can see at the top, this section, 15.2-1300, its URL is vacode.org/15.2-1300. It's small, and it doesn't help most people. But for those of us who need to refer to the law frequently, it's incredibly helpful to just be able to type in that domain name / section number, and you're done. You're looking at exactly what it is that you want to be looking at. Where this is developed is on a website called GitHub. Anybody here familiar with GitHub? A few, all right. Bravo. You'll be hearing a lot about GitHub in the future for those of you who aren't. GitHub is a collaborative software development website. The idea is that for people who are working on software, not at private businesses who hold the source code of their programs as an intellectual secret, but those of us who want to develop things collaboratively where anybody can share the source code as open source software as it's known, GitHub is the home for that. So the result is that all of the work that I do on the State Decoded goes up on this website. Every issue that's filed, every ticket that's filed for a bug or a feature by me or anybody else, that's all up there. So this is the source code that anybody can download and look at the revision history. People can also propose fixes. So like here's a listing of what, there's 198 issues have already been resolved, and there's 83 remaining until the project is finished. Anybody can contribute code. They can file what's known as a pull request, which is when you say, I see what you're doing with your software. Here's my proposal. Here's a new version of this file that is actually better. And I can review it and say, oh, yes, that would be great, and include it in my project. And boom, my program's better, and I didn't have to do anything. And these sorts of improvements are being made by the people who are deploying it in states where they say, yeah, this should work a little better for us. Here's a change that would make this more useful. So the project is at version 0.6 right now. Over the next few weeks, version 0.7, 8, and 9 will tumble out real quickly. And then in a couple of months, at version 1.0, it will be feature complete. So remember this cryptic history text that we saw from Virginia's open meetings law. Excuse me. So tough to understand. Now at the bottom of the law, there's a narrative version of it. This is that precise history information, but now it's displayed in a way that people can read through and understand what it is that they're seeing with links to the acts of the General Assembly. So you can actually follow through and see what 1995's Chapter 562 was. So it was just I think it's 50 lines of very simple code. This wasn't difficult. I'd be happy to give, well, it's all open source. I don't have to give it to them. I'd be happy for Virginia to take this and put it on their official website so they could display something substantially more useful than what they display now. I want to give you a peek at the new design. It's completely finished. If I were not here, I would be working right now on integrating this into the package. It's the same information, but it's displayed much more nicely. It's a responsive design that will make it beautiful on iPad and iPhone and so on. So here's the thing about this project and this idea of scraping data off of government websites and setting up these third-party websites. It's really dumb. This is really stupid. State Decoded probably shouldn't exist, certainly not in its current form. State websites shouldn't be train wrecks. Laws should be available for download, and people shouldn't have to get their laws from third-party websites where who knows if they can be trusted. This is a really bad system, and I'm participating in it because it's the best I can do, but we're working on something better, which leads to my second point, which is the awful truth that FOIA is terrible. Every FOIA request is a failure of government to have already distributed information properly that people want. One request yields one response. This is inefficient for everybody. Why isn't that response going up where everybody can see it? There should be an internal review saying, how did we fail to provide information that people wanted? Now, maybe there's some stuff that's so weird that's not going to go up online anytime soon. I get that. But instead of FOIA requests being used as a measure of success, we need to start using them as a measure of failure. We need this new model for distributing this information and new metrics for measuring open government. But the gold standard is for the data to have already been published. I'd like to quote from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Just read a little passage here for you that I think sums up why the best thing we have in open government right now, FOIA, is also terrible. This is the main character, Arthur Dent, has just been surprised by bulldozers arriving at his home, preparing to knock it down to build a highway. So he has gone to the town hall to ask what's going on. So this is somebody at the town hall talking to him. Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months. Well, oh yes, well, as soon as I heard, I went straight round to see them yesterday afternoon. You hadn't exactly gone out of your way to call attention to them, had you? I mean, like, actually telling anybody or anything. Well, but the plans were on display. On display? I eventually had to go down to the cellar to find them. Well, that's the display department. With a flashlight. Well, the lights had probably gone. So had the stairs. But look, you found the notice, didn't you? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." This is my refrain. Let's do this better. We can do a better job than this. We need to stop regarding FOIA as, it is wonderful, it is so much better than what came before, we're going to need it for a long time, but every FOIA request should be seen as a failure. I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about Project Open Data. Just launched by the White House 9 days ago, the White House is trying to lead the way, at least conceptually, in doing this better. Project Open Data is a radical rethinking of the concept of open data. And I should say that while I am a member of the Project Open Data team, I do not work for the White House. I do not work for the federal government, and I cannot speak for the team. I can just be an enthusiastic person on the sidelines in my capacity here today. So President Obama released this executive order 9 days ago, Thursday before last, making machine-readable data the default for the storage and the release of government data. And when I say release, the idea is that it should be preemptively released and already available. Not that when somebody FOIAs something, they should get a file that can be read by software. I mean, that's great, but it should be already out there. So the idea is to provide XML, not Word files, and JSON files, not PDF, and CSV, not page scans. The president also makes quite clear that government data is to be regarded as a crucial national resource of the utmost value, commercial and otherwise, and citizens have a right to it over the internet, and they shouldn't have to request it. This executive order was backed with a policy memo specifying precisely how agencies must make open the new norm and specifying just what qualifies as open, and I'm here to tell you that it is a wonderfully narrow definition of open. It also has a detailed website that explains to really the intended audience for this is folks within agencies to say, here's how to go about implementing this. The White House has said before, open government needs to happen, and that's great, but it didn't actually happen. Instead, we had to figure out what are the obstacles, what's actually getting in the way. And a major obstacle was agencies not really understanding how to do it. So this explains what it really means to provide an API. How you generate a CSV file, how you generate XML. But better yet, up on GitHub, we produced a collection of a dozen free open source tools developed collaboratively to facilitate this public release of machine-readable data files. And we built these especially to overcome common objections and obstacles within federal agencies that have kept them from complying with existing memos and executive orders, although these programs are useful to anybody. And a great example of this is agencies that would say, we have a database, and we know we need to have this thing you call an API. We don't know how to get here from there. But they wouldn't say that. They'd throw up some excuse because it's embarrassing to say, I don't know what I'm talking about. It's easier to say, national security prohibits us from releasing this, or some catch-all excuse like that. So we created a tool called DB2API. It takes about 30 seconds to configure. It plumbs your database, takes all the data. You can set up a blacklist of like, no, these tables you can't release, or these columns of data are private and you can't release those, and pops up an API. So it's about 30 seconds to configure. It runs basically instantly. You're done. Now you have an API. So we have a bunch of tools that we created like that specifically to overcome those obstacles and objections. Here's the biggest change. It's one thing to share data. It's another to allow people to contribute improvements back to government data and projects. So as of last night, the Project Open Data GitHub repository has had 54 of those pull requests, 54 people who've said, here's some code that's better than the code you've already written, or here's some text that's better than the text you've already written. All of those pull requests are public. Anybody can see or comment on or discuss in the open those proposed modifications. So the onus is on the White House to accept or reject those and to justify those decisions. This is a pretty serious modification to the concept of open government. So this is on Wednesday. You are seeing here US Chief Information Officer Steve Van Rokel accepting the first pull request. This is somebody who had redesigned the Project Open Data website to make it responsive so it would work properly on iPads and iPhones and look nicer, put some nice touches into it. This person did it just a few days after the site launched, and Steve Van Rokel accepted the pull request, and the site now looks beautiful. That is a pretty jarring change in the idea of open government, that citizens should be able to say, this state code website sucks, but that's fine, I'm gonna make it better. And you can use that now. It's a strong change. Here's a proposed pull request to modify policy language. The policy's up on GitHub too. By putting the policy on GitHub, where anybody can propose changes in the open, it's a self-modifying policy. Now, the White House is working on the internal infrastructure to accept these proposals, but it's happening. So let's just pause and let that sink in. A self-modifying policy. Now, if this goes well, if this isn't some disaster in ways that we can't foresee, imagine that we start putting up all policies on GitHub. Imagine that we start putting up all the laws on GitHub. And so somebody can file a pull request and say, I'd like to amend this law. And a congressman can say, I'll accept that pull request and file it as a bill. That's amazing. I mean, this is where we're headed if this goes well, if the resulting data is used by people, if the standards that we've put forward are embraced, not just on a federal level, but on a state level and a local level, and by groups like all of y'all, so there's an expectation that it will continue to exist and thrive. And this is a radically different view of open government than do they answer FOIA requests quickly. Now, I don't want to eliminate FOIA. FOIA is wildly important. It's the best tool that we have right now. I just heard this morning that the Attorney General of Virginia is doubling down on denying a FOIA request I filed last week. He has declared that FOIA doesn't apply to him. This is the first anybody's heard of this. This is a stunning decision, particularly on the day that he is accepting his party's nomination to run for governor. FOIA is important to me, but we need to start regarding the use of FOIA as a failure. Open government should be provision-based, not demand-based. And we need to start expecting that from governments. So when you put together your scorecards for open government, it's great to file those test FOIA requests and see how promptly the responses come and how complete they are, but don't forget what should already be up there. You shouldn't have to FOIA a lot of the stuff that you're FOIAing. It should already be available. Let's do this better, and I hope you'll help. Thank you for your time. Can I take any questions? I don't deal with it at all now, but there is an open issue that needs to be resolved before 1.0 to have a lookup table, the ability to say, just a spreadsheet to be able to provide that says all of these are now this. So there's some human intervention required when that happened, but my hope is that, as with Virginia, they'll provide me with that list that can be plugged into the software, and the software automatically remaps those requests. The software will, it must before 1.0, because it's an outstanding issue, automatically remap those requests. So, yes. So what the state decoded is doing is it's just asking Richmond Sunlight, which Megan had talked about some, it's asking Richmond Sunlight, hey, what are all of the bills that have cited this section in the listing of what it changes? So they would all show up, that's right. I am the opposite of worried about that. And I do want to be clear, though, that I think there are a lot of pitfalls that will accompany this new concept to a open government. That it is not a clear path to success, and I can come up with a bunch of reasons why this is trouble. But it's a whole lot better kind of trouble than what we have now, where we have this ostensibly open and transparent system that is not. It's a beware of leopard system. So, yes, John. Less and less. Early on, states that wanted to get involved, there's a big time commitment, but as the project gets easier and easier, it's easier to get set up. When it's at 1.0, you're looking at, you might need a programmer to take a few solid days, depending on how well data is already provided by the New Jersey government. And I don't happen to have a spreadsheet of it, but the question is whether or not they provide bulk downloads, and if they don't, if that could be FOIA'd, and if their website is very scrapable. But once those basic questions are dealt with, it's a few days for a competent programmer. I'd like to get it down to a few hours. Thanks everybody for your time, I appreciate it.